You think you know the Omega Man, but the version that reached audiences barely survived production. A composer and director both died the same year, decades later. The interracial kiss that shocked America wasn't even the most controversial part.
She looked so beautiful that I was struck by it immediately.
Today, we're exposing 15 hidden truths behind the Omega Man, including the single scene that secretly created Mystery Science Theater 3000. The $0 budget miracle. The production company needed a locale that looked like an abandoned city. Building one would cost millions. But producer Walter Seltzer drove through downtown Los Angeles one weekend and made a shocking discovery. There were no shoppers, no pedestrians. The financial district was completely deserted on Sunday mornings in late 1970. This gave director Boris Sagal a brilliant solution. Shoot every exterior scene on weekends for absolutely nothing. The empty streets, the abandoned cars, the eerie silence, all real, all free. But despite careful planning by the film crew, some exterior shots accidentally captured bystanders and moving cars in the background. You can still see them today if you look closely. Ghosts of the real world bleeding into the apocalypse. It's a spooky feeling to screw Moses. Rosalind Cash was nervous. This was her first leading role in a major film, and she had to do a love scene with Charlton Heston. But it wasn't just the intimacy that made her edgy. It was the weight of who Heston represented. Cash had grown up watching him play Moses, Ben-Hur, and other larger-than-life heroes. In his autobiography, Heston explained what happened before they filmed their intimate scenes. Cash told him directly, "It's a spooky feeling to screw Moses." Heston realized that an entire generation of actors had grown up seeing him only as these iconic biblical and historical figures. The interracial romance itself was considered shockingly progressive for 1971. But what really caused controversy wasn't the kiss. It was the fact that they were living together unmarried. A full-bird colonel shacking up with someone? That was considered positively hippie style. The deleted dead baby scene. The script for the Omega Man contained a scene that was filmed but never made the final cut. Lisa visits her parents' grave. Unknown to Neville, she's pregnant, seeking comfort from her deceased parents before they leave the city forever. While talking to the grave, she hears a sound and investigates a nearby crypt. Inside, she discovers a female family member depositing a dead newborn mutant. Lisa sees the mother's grief and empathizes with the woman's loss, despite being on different sides. The scene would have shown that the family weren't just monsters. They were suffering humans. Lisa tells Neville she won't kill the grieving mother, because she may be a grieving parent herself in a few months. The scene was cut, likely because it humanized the villains too much. But the credit for Woman in Cemetery Crypt actress Anna Aries remains in the film. The crucifixion that wasn't in the script. The most iconic image from the Omega Man almost didn't exist. In Charlton Heston's autobiography, he revealed that the crucifixion scene was not in the original screenplay. The final shot shows Neville hanging from the fountain with his arms spread wide, blood in the water, positioned exactly like Christ on the cross. It's a powerful statement about sacrifice and salvation. As it turns out, someone suggested the image during filming, and the creative team realized it fit perfectly into the storyline about Neville giving his blood to save humanity. So they added it. That improvised decision created the single most memorable and debated frame of the entire film. The religious symbolism wasn't subtle, it wasn't planned, but it became the lasting visual that defined the Omega Man for generations. Sometimes the best creative choices happen by accident. The director's tragic helicopter death, Boris Sagal, directed the Omega Man in 1971. He was mostly a television director with a long career in episodic drama. 10 years later, on May 22, 1981, Sagal was directing the TV miniseries World War III in Oregon. The production was filming at Timberline Lodge on Mount Hood, the same hotel used for exterior shots in The Shining. Seagal had just returned from filming aerial shots. The helicopter landed in the parking lot. Preoccupied with his work, Seagal exited the aircraft and inadvertently turned the wrong way. He walked directly into the rear rotor blade. The impact partially decapitated him. He was rushed 60 miles to a hospital in Portland, where he underwent emergency surgery. 5 hours later, he died from severe head and shoulder injuries. His wife, dancer Marge Champion, was at the hospital with him. Astonishingly, filming resumed the very next day with a new director. The Combat Curse. The tragedy gets darker. Boris Seagal had directed the pilot episode of the 1960s TV series Combat, which starred actor Vic Morrow. 20 years after they worked together, both men would die in nearly identical accidents. Seagal walked into helicopter rotor blades in 1981. Just 2 years later, in 1983, Vic Morrow was killed while filming Twilight Zone, the movie when a helicopter crashed and its rotor blades struck him. Two men from the same TV show, both killed by helicopter rotors within 2 years of each other. Film journalists and fans started calling it the Combat Curse. The coincidence was so disturbing that it became part of Hollywood folklore. Seagal's daughter, actress Katie Seagal, famous for Married with Children and Sons of Anarchy, rarely speaks about her father's death. The curse that connected two deaths across 2 decades remains one of the most chilling patterns in film history. Orson Welles, almost directed. Charlton Heston had read Richard Matheson's novel I Am Legend on an airplane and became fascinated with doing a modern adaptation. He didn't know the book had already been filmed in 1964 as The Last Man on Earth with Vincent Price. According to film historians, Heston supposedly tried to interest Orson Welles in directing the project. Welles had worked with Heston before on the masterpiece Touch of Evil, and their collaboration had been legendary. But Welles was never truly interested in the science fiction material. The project went to television director Boris Seagal instead. However, the Welles influence remained. Cinematographer Russell Meddy, who had shot Touch of Evil and worked with both Heston and Welles multiple times, was hired to shoot the Omega Man. You can see Welles-style camera angles throughout the opening, especially the wide-angle shots of Heston driving through deserted LA streets with the camera mounted on the car hood. The Ron Grainer controversy composer Ron Grainer was famous for creating the Doctor Who theme and the Prisoner theme. For the Omega Man, he delivered something experimental and divisive. Grainer mixed traditional orchestra with early synthesizers. Water chimes struck while submerged in water, Spanish-tinged trumpet, and a haunting pipe organ. The result was deeply evocative but wildly unconventional. Film score fans absolutely loved it and praised the innovative soundscape. But general audiences hated the electronic sounds and wanted a traditional orchestral score. The divide was so extreme that the soundtrack remains controversial to this day. Some call it a masterpiece, others call it one of the worst scores ever recorded. Grainer didn't live long enough to see vindication. He died in 1981, the exact same year as director Boris Seagal, from health problems related to his failing eyesight. The experimental score that split audiences became his final theatrical film work. The scene that created mystery, Science Theater 3000. There's a sequence in The Omega Man where Neville sits alone in an empty movie theater watching Woodstock. He recites the dialogue. He marvels at the crowds. He talks to the screen about all the living people, now gone. This single scene inspired comedian Joel Hodgson to create Mystery Science Theater 3000. Hodgson originally conceived a show called You Are Here, based directly on this moment. The premise was post-apocalyptic. A man and his robot companion would watch movies after the end of the world and comment on them. The concept was too dark, so Hodgson blended it with ideas from Silent Running and moved the setting to space. But the core DNA came from watching Charlton Heston interact with a movie in an empty theater. Without the Omega Man's lonely Woodstock scene, MST3K might never have existed. One moment of isolation created the most beloved cult TV show in history. The Warner Brothers' facade that stood for 52 years. Neville's Fortress penthouse wasn't a real building. It was a facade constructed on the Warner Brothers ranch backlot in Burbank, formerly the Columbia Ranch. The structure was built specifically for the Omega Man and represented Neville's high-tech survival compound. After filming wrapped, the facade remained standing. For 52 years, it sat relatively unchanged on the Warner Brothers lot, becoming a landmark for studio tours and location scouts. Fans could easily see it using Google Maps in 3D view. The facade faced east-southeast and appeared in numerous other productions over the decades. Film historians considered it an important piece of science fiction cinema history. But in 2023, Warner Brothers demolished the entire site as part of a massive redevelopment project. The fortress that protected the last man on Earth for over half a century was finally erased. Sometimes the apocalypse comes from real estate developers, not biological warfare. Charlton Heston's box office gamble. During production on the Omega Man, Charlton Heston was desperately fighting for his passion project. He wanted to direct himself in Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra, but studios were terrified of funding it. The problem was simple. Heston's last 4 films before the Omega Man had done tepid business at the box office. Nobody wanted to invest in a Shakespeare adaptation starring and directed by an actor whose commercial appeal seemed finished. Throughout filming, Heston was constantly flying out to test actors, interview potential directors, and meet investors. The stress was enormous. Then, the Omega Man opened in August 1971 and became a genuine hit. It was Heston's first box office success in 2 years. That single success gave him the leverage he needed. The interracial romance no one wanted writers. John William Corrington and Joyce Hooper Corrington made a deliberate creative choice. They decided Neville's love interest would be an African-American woman. Their reasoning was sophisticated. In a world where humanity faced extinction, the few survivors would no longer care about racial divisions. Love and survival would matter more than skin color. Even though interracial relationships were still deeply controversial in 1971, the writers figured the apocalyptic setting justified it. What surprised them was which aspect caused the most reaction. It wasn't the kiss between Heston and Rosalind Cash. It was the fact that they were living together, unmarried. A decorated military colonel shacking up with his girlfriend? Critics and audiences considered that positively hippie-style behavior. The music writes mystery. The opening sequence of the Omega Man features one of cinema's most haunting images. Charlton Heston driving his red convertible through completely deserted Los Angeles streets. In the theatrical version, released in 1971, the song playing on his 8-track stereo was Frank Sinatra's Strangers in the Night. The juxtaposition of Sinatra's romantic crooning against abandoned civilization created an eerie emotional impact. But when the film was released on home video, VHS, DVD, and streaming, something changed. The song was replaced with A Summer Place by Percy Faith. Music rights issues forced the substitution, but nobody has ever publicly explained exactly why. Licensing disputes, estate disagreements, lost contracts? The real reason remains a mystery. Tim Burton's Desert Island movie director. Tim Burton has a confession. In a 2009 interview for his Museum of Modern Art exhibit, he revealed that if he was stranded alone on a desert island, he would choose the Omega Man. He doesn't fully understand why it's one of his favorite movies, but it absolutely is. No matter how many times he's seen it, if the Omega Man appears on television, Burton stops everything to watch. He credits the film with showing him something revolutionary. It was the first time he noticed cheesy one-liners used deliberately for comic effect in a dramatic film. The irony-tinged quips that Neville delivers throughout the movie created a template. Years before Arnold Schwarzenegger made I'll Be Back famous, Richard Matheson hated it author. Richard Matheson wrote the novel I Am Legend in 1954. The Omega Man was the second adaptation of his book, following 1964's The Last Man on Earth starring Vincent Price. Matheson actively hated the Vincent Price version and fought to have his name removed from it. But the Omega Man? It didn't provoke much reaction from him at all. Not anger, not approval, just cold indifference. When asked about the film years later, Matheson said he doubted Charlton Heston even realized he was doing Matheson's book. So little of the original novel remained on screen that it barely resembled the source material. The philosophical depth, the vampire mythology, the tragic ending where the protagonist realizes he's become the monster, all gone. From accidental bystanders caught forever in the background to the director and composer, who both died the same tragic year. The Omega Man remains haunted by strange coincidences and darker truths. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment with your favorite post-apocalyptic movie, and subscribe for more deep dives into forgotten sci-fi classics that changed everything. See you in the next one.